On this early morning. The AX-2 mission is the second all-private crew to the International Space Station, dedicated to expanding access to low Earth orbit for all. You're watching the live approach and docking coverage of the AX-2 mission as NASA, SpaceX, and Axiom Space begin close proximity operations with the International Space Station. Hello, I am Duke Brady, a multimedia specialist with Axiom Space, and with me is Kate Tice, Quality Systems Engineering Manager here at SpaceX. Our four-person Axiom crew will experience 10 days on orbit, 8 days on board the ISS. This webcast is a joint broadcast between NASA, SpaceX, and Axiom Space as we will walk you through the events of Dragon approaching and docking with the ISS and carry our coverage through to the welcome ceremony that awaits the crew once they are on board the International Space Station.
The AX-2 mission officially started yesterday, Sunday, May 21st, when the Axiom crew lifted off from historic pad 39A at 2:37 p.m. Pacific, 5:37 p.m. Eastern. The crew inside Dragon spacecraft is now in position to begin approaching the International Space Station. Now let's check in with the teams at Johnson Space Center who are actively monitoring Dragon Freedom's progress.
Good morning, Kate and Duke, and welcome to the International Space Station Flight Control Room. I'm NASA's Leah Cheshire, and Dragon has been chasing down the International Space Station for almost 14 hours now since that launch yesterday, and we are just seconds away from the approach initiation burn. Now, the approach initiation burn is going to bring Dragon up about 400 meters below the International Space Station, so about a quarter of a mile. And it's also, and we just heard the call, that the AI burn has begun. We're probably going to hear some chatter between the crew and the ground here throughout the morning. The teams here in Mission Control Houston are being led by Flight Director Marcos Flores. They're monitoring all of these systems aboard the International Space Station.
Okay, we'll move into switch round 3 then.
And to the right of Marcos Flores is our Capcom, Justin Cartledge. He is working with the teams aboard the International Space Station, speaking with the astronauts there. Again, the AI burn is underway. This is a firing of the Draco thrusters on Dragon. It's about a 90-second burn. And it's going to bring us up until we're about 400 meters.
Suit donning and audio configuration.
Copy that. 4.010 complete.
That call from Commander Peggy Whitson aboard Dragon that they are now in their suits and they have good comm checks. And we have confirmation of a good AI or approach initiation burn.
Dragon,
again, that
SpaceX
approach
on the big
initiation.
loop. We had nominal AI maneuver completion. Reminder, if C2V2 link is lost for 10 minutes without ground action, Dragon will perform a breakout. Timers are available in your event details.
And Dragon copies.
And Dragon SpaceX on the big loop. Let's try this again. 144K bidirectional link is established. Change your PTT destination to ISS and then initiate comm check with SpaceX, Houston, and station.
Dragon copies on the big loop. So Dragon SpaceX, how do you read?
And Dragon, I believe you still have ground set elected to your PTT.
And with completion.
Ground, or SpaceX ground, Dragon, how do you read us on the big loop?
And Dragon SpaceX on Dragon and Ground, if you could switch seat 2 to PTT of ISS.
Yes, my bad. SpaceX Dragon on the big loop now for seat 2. How do you read?
And I have you 5x5 on the big loop.
Excellent. And Station Dragon on the big loop. How do you read?
Dragon Station has you loud and clear.
Looking forward to seeing you guys.
Likewise.
And Houston Station on the big loop. How do you read?
Houston, read you 5x5. How me?
We have you loud and clear as well.
And SpaceX Dragon Ground, how do you read?
And John, I have you 5x5. How me?
Sounds good, thanks.
As you can hear, we are up and running this morning. You heard a lot of comm checks when we were discussing the big loop. This is a loop created so that the space station, Dragon, and the teams on the ground in Hawthorne and here in Mission Control Houston can all communicate on the same loop. Our Cronus flight controller set that up this morning.
And Dragon SpaceX on Dragon and Ground for suit leak checks.
Dragon, go.
Hey John, you have a go to perform 4.011 to start your suit leak checks.
Okay, sounds good. We're go for suit leak checks. Dragon.
The AX2 crew members are already in their suits this morning. And we did, at the start of today's broadcast, just have completion of the approach initiation burn. Dragon is now about 400 meters below the International Space Station. It has also passed into the approach ellipsoid. We call that the AE. That's an imaginary shape measuring a 4 kilometer by 2 by 2 kilometer, essentially a large 3-dimensional oval. This means Dragon is on a 24-hour safe trajectory.
Ground, low priority.
Dragon ready.
Hey John, I was just wondering, did that echo resolve itself?
Yes, sir. You're crystal clear now. Thank you very much.
That's good to hear. Thanks.
The crew reported hearing an echo just moments ago before we joined the broadcast today when they had multiple loops set up for communication, but now everyone is established and speaking on the big loop, meaning all teams involved can hear the communication. We are tracking docking to the Node 2 Zenith, or the space-facing port, this morning at the International Space Station at about 8:10 a.m. Central Time, 9:10 Eastern Time. So moving right on time. Now 14 hours and 2 minutes since launch yesterday afternoon.
SpaceX Dragon Ground. We're ready to pressurize at 2.2.
And Dragon SpaceX, you are go to initiate suit leak checks.
Dragon copies.
Again, we are here in Mission Control Houston this morning, monitoring Dragon's docking to the International Space Station, scheduled for 8:10 a.m. Central Time. But we have teams in Mission Control Hawthorne monitoring Dragon's flight since launch yesterday as well. So I'm going to send it back to Kate and Duke.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Leah. We did hear the call out that the crew got the okay to begin the suit leak check. As Leah mentioned before, they donned their suits a little bit ago, and that leak check is basically just inflating the suits a little bit and monitoring the pressure for a couple of minutes just to make sure that now that their suits are back on, all those zippers are in the right place and the visor is latched and locked and ready to approach.
It's great. It's great to hear all those healthy comm checks as well. As the Dragon begins its approach to the space station, let's learn a little bit more about the AX-2 crew. The AX-2 mission is commanded by retired NASA astronaut Peggy Whitson. Born and raised in Beaconsfield, Iowa, she was inspired along with the world when she watched the Apollo 11 crew walk on the moon. She has since become the most experienced American astronaut and one of the most decorated. Whitson flew 3 long-duration missions to the ISS and has more cumulative time in space, 665 days, than any U.S. astronaut and more than any woman in the world. She has conducted 10 spacewalks with over 60 hours out in the vacuum of space and has performed hundreds of research experiments on board the ISS. Not only is she the commander for this mission, but Peggy also serves as the director of human spaceflight for Axiom Space.
The pilot for AX-2 is private astronaut John Schaffner. Born in Alaska and raised in Kentucky, Schaffner is a STEAM education advocate, business pioneer, and lifelong space enthusiast. A pilot since the age of 17, John has over 8,500 flight hours holding commercial, instrument, single-engine, and multi-engine ratings in land and sea aircraft, as well as helicopter. He also holds ratings in former military jets and high performance.
SpaceX Dragon ground. We show 4 good suit leak checks here.
And ground concurs.
All right, good news there. Just letting us know that all the suit leak checks checked out. As an athlete, John has years of competitive experience in water skiing, cycling, whitewater kayaking, hang gliding, skydiving, and base jumping. John trained as the AX-1 backup pilot, and during this mission, plans to invest a lot of his time in STEAM education activities aimed at empowering educators and inspiring teachers.
And representing the Saudi Space Commission and serving as a mission specialist, Ali Al-Karni was born in March 1992 in Sabd al-Alaya, Saudi Arabia. Ali is fluent in English as well as his native Arabic, and as an Air Force captain, Ali has 12 years of experience flying on multiple aircraft, primarily on the F-15SA in service to the Royal Saudi Air Force. Ali graduated with a Bachelor of Aerospace Science degree in 2013 from King Faisal Air Academy in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia.
Also representing the Saudi Space Commission and serving as a mission specialist, Rayana Barnawi was born in September 1988 in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. Rayana has a master's degree in biomedical sciences from Al Faisal University in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and a bachelor's degree in biomedical sciences from Otago University in Dunedin, New Zealand. She is fluent in English and Turkish as well as native Arabic. She has been a research lab technician since 2013 in the Stem Cell and Tissue Reengineering Program at King Faisal Specialist Hospital and Research Center located in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia.
And there you have it, the AX-2 crew. This is a fantastic, wonderful group of people who have spent months and thousands of hours preparing for this moment. We are so proud of them, and it's so awesome to finally see them in space.
Yeah, we had an opportunity to actually hear from the crew I was like about 3 hours after they made it to, after they got into space. That on-orbit media event was awesome. We got to see and hear from Peggy, John, Ali, and Rayana, and it was just so cool to see them floating around and spinning their water bottles and playing with the zero-G indicator. And yeah, it was just a lot of fun to see them play.
It really was great.
Now, today's crew, as we said, Peggy Whitson, John Schaffner, Ali Al-Karni, and Rayana Barnawi have gone through extensive training around the globe to be ready for their 10 days in space. Each crew member has between 700 and 1,000 logged hours of time since mid-2021 dedicated to learning these SpaceX protocols, ISS systems, and to prepare for the science and outreach activities that they'll be conducting while in space. Private astronaut training is rigorous. To prepare the AX-2 crew for their mission, our teams here at SpaceX have spent the last several months teaching the crew about orbital mechanics, how to live in microgravity, and running simulations full of missions from inside our Dragon training capsules. The training program includes nearly 100 different lessons covering all aspects of the flight.
And the list of training goes on. There's a lot more that they did, and we'll try to recap some of it. The AX-2 crew spent time in simulators to orient their bodies to the conditions that may be experienced during the course of the mission, including into a centrifuge right here, simulating higher G-forces. Alternatively, the crew also participated in a zero-G parabola flight that simulated the lack of G-forces to experience weightlessness. Seems awesome. But aside from the simulating gravitational forces they will experience over the course of their journey, they also underwent altitude training in a hyperbaric chamber. This training simulates high altitudes where oxygen levels are low, and the crew uses this to identify how their bodies respond to hypoxic situations, as well as recognizing those effects in their crewmates. To be ready to spend 8 days on board and working on the International Space Station, they've spent time learning from mission controllers, experts in safety and emergency ISS procedures, as well as the essentials to living on board the orbiting laboratory. Things like how to heat up your food, where to find all the equipment you need, etc. The goal is to be able to confidently complete every task on their timeline, but to also be contributing members of the space station as a whole as other astronauts carry out their duties. And to that end, this crew will be working in areas on the ISS that are owned and operated by other countries. So the crew traveled to Germany and Japan to be qualified on those systems. The European Space Agency's Columbus module was in Cologne, Germany, where they trained on systems and operations for daily tasks as well as responding to contingencies. Separately, to qualify for the Japanese Exploration Module, or GEM, the crew traveled to Tsukuba, Japan to learn from the instructors from the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency. As you can imagine, international collaboration is a constant throughout this mission. So it's one thing to learn the systems of ISS, but it's just as important to understand how to live and work as a team in a shared space. And so the team spent 5 days training in the Human Exploration Research Analog, or HERA, at the Johnson Space Center. This is a confined experience that is designed to isolate the crew to build cohesiveness and teamwork. This experience included a chance to simulate work and research procedures, rehearse outreach efforts, and even respond to mock emergencies, all while living in close quarters, unable to leave.
The team also spent time at the launch pad, in the suit-up room, and working through emergency procedures that might be necessary in the unlikely event of a pad abort scenario.
That's right. That's right.
Pretty cool to see.
Absolutely. And you know, all of this training culminated in a final patch hanging ceremony at Johnson Space Center to mark the end of this crew's training. This is a tradition of NASA's that dates back to the beginning of the ISS 20 plus years ago. All that is to say this team is ready to go. And the last few months have all led to the here and now. What they accomplish on station is going to help write the guidebook for our next missions and how we coordinate efforts on our future Axiom station. Needless to say, this is also an important moment for those training crews as really they become a family and feel so connected after all of that time together.
Now, on your screen, we have our first view of Dragon. This view comes to us from the International Space Station. We can see the lights blinking, indicating its location, and this is the furthest away it will be on camera. So it is approaching the International Space Station. For those of you that have just recently joined us, we had confirmation that the crew completed their suit leak checks, and those leak checks looked good. So they are in their seats, they're strapped in, and they are monitoring the progress of their approach to the International Space Station.
This is what traffic looks like at the ISS.
Very true.
There's no doubt that the incredible efforts of thousands of folks across NASA over the last 2 decades have set the stage for what is possible in low Earth orbit. The X2 mission is a critical step toward opening those possibilities to a host of new participants, governments, diverse researchers, manufacturers, and more. Here on Earth, we're already seeing benefits from research currently conducted on the ISS, from water and air purification systems to testing medical devices and therapeutics. Pretty amazing stuff.
In addition to tech demos and medical research, access to low Earth orbit allows for a connection to the arts and other outreach opportunities. AX2 is the first of several proposed missions in advance of Axiom Station, the world's first commercial space station. A sustainable commercial low Earth orbit economy means expanded access to work in space. It also frees up NASA and its partners to put their budget towards other exploration programs while granting space agencies around the world more opportunities through commercial efforts.
And over its lifetime, the ISS has accomplished an unprecedented feat, continuously sustained operations on and off the Earth for more than 22 years. This is not only a true testament to the technology required to physically achieve that, but also to the collaborative and cooperative efforts of thousands of people across the world to ensure that multiple nations, agencies, and entities, both public and private, work together to push humanity forward. And as we move forward, private industries need time to learn how to establish and maintain these relationships effectively. So, by flying private astronaut missions like AX2 to the ISS, Axiom is taking essential steps to get that on-the-job training as we work towards building the world's first commercial space station. Axiom Station is an opportunity to continue the story of the ISS, science, and research through cooperation and collaboration for the benefit of all. AX2 is this next chapter.
So once again, we are observing Dragon Freedom as it approaches the International Space Station. The crew has their suits on, they're in their seats, and they are inside those blinking lights.
That's so amazing to think about.
Now, we will see those blinking lights get closer and closer over the next couple of hours. Everything when you are approaching or departing the International Space Station is highly choreographed, and it's really slow, and that's for safety purposes. It's the safer way and the best way to do it. So we will see Dragon get closer and closer. Even those 2 lights that we see, the red one and the green one, they represent the port and starboard side, and I never remember what color goes to what, but I can tell you that we will start to see those get closer as we have been, even over the last few minutes.
And you might be seeing some stars on your screen, but most of those dots are dead pixels in that camera sensor, and that happens because of that high radiation in space.
Now, Dragon is capable of carrying up to 7 passengers to and from Earth orbit and beyond. It is the only spacecraft currently flying that is capable of returning significant amounts of cargo to Earth, and is the first private spacecraft to take humans to the space station. Dragon is fully autonomous, which means that it flies itself, but it also features full manual override capabilities in case of emergency. Standing at almost 27 feet tall from bottom of the trunk to the top of the nose cone, Crew Dragon is composed of 2 main elements: the capsule, which is designed to hold crew and pressurized cargo, as well as an unpressurized section, which is known as the trunk. The nose cone at the top of the capsule protects the docking system and also the guidance navigation control system, which is the system that's being primarily utilized right now as Dragon is approaching the International Space Station. That nose cone opens for docking and remains attached to the space station, attached to the Crew Dragon spacecraft, unlike previous versions of Dragon, and that helps toward our efforts toward reusability. Now, opposite of the nose cone is the trunk. It provides attachment points for Falcon 9, the Dragon capsule, and cargo. One half of the trunk is covered in solar panels. That's the black side of the trunk on the exterior. And those provide power to Dragon during flight and while on station. The other half contains a radiator, and it rejects heat from the active thermal control system to space using SpaceX's new Pika tiling technology. The trunk also now has new aerodynamic fins, which provide stability in the event of an emergency abort. Now, in the event of an emergency abort, Crew Dragon is outfitted with 8 Super Draco thrusters, as opposed to just the regular Draco thrusters, and those power the astronauts to safety. Dragon's Super Draco launch escape system is a key safety feature of Crew Dragon, and it gives the crew the ability to quickly separate from Falcon 9 and safely escape from the time of launch all the way to orbit. It's a feature that no other spacecraft in history has possessed. So it's pretty awesome, and it's a great safety feature.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kate. We are actually going to toss back now to Leah at Mission Control at Johnson Space Center. Leah?
Thank you both very much. And yes, tally-ho, we have sights set on Dragon. Now, as you can see, it is pretty dark outside. That's because the International Space Station is in an orbital nighttime. It's currently flying over the South Pacific Ocean, about 261 miles above Earth. And of course, Dragon is now just slightly below it. Waypoint 0 brought Dragon the approach initiation burn brought Dragon to waypoint 0 at 400 meters below the International Space Station. The systems have checked out, and it's now moving up toward waypoint 1. That is when Dragon is approximately 220 meters above the space station. It'll be on the docking axis, meaning it's directly in front of the docking port. So the crew are headed to the zenith port, the space-facing port of Node 2. And the other Dragon that's currently on board, which brought the Crew 6 crew earlier this year, that is docked to the forward port of the Harmony module. As you can see, we go in and out of receiving feeds from the International Space Station. That happens when we go through satellite handover periods. The International Space Station is orbiting Earth and seeing a sunrise and a sunset every 45 minutes. So we constantly hand over to different satellites that receive the feeds from the station and send it back to us on the ground. So you'll see that a little bit this morning. After we reach waypoint 1, we will pause until Dragon gets the go to move into waypoint 2. That's when they're only 20 meters away from the International Space Station, and the spacecraft is focused on aligning its docking system with the International Docking Adapter. Slow and steady wins the race at this point in the mission. Right now we're moving at less than 5 miles per hour. And as we move in from waypoint 2, we'll be moving even slower. We may hear the call-out chop at a little less than 30 seconds before docking. That's the crew hands-off point, when any aborts need to be done automatically by Dragon. And of course, we are tracking docking to come in at about 8:10 a.m. Central Time this morning. The crew are in their suits. They have completed good suit leak checks, everything continuing to move along very smoothly today. A look back at some of what was completed last night. Shortly after launch, less than an hour after liftoff, at about 5:23 p.m. Central Time, Dragon executed the phase burn. That was the first of the 5 major burns required to raise Dragon's orbit and position it for approach to the space station. About 7 hours later, we had the boost burn. That puts the crew in an orbit where Dragon's apogee, or the highest point, is about 10 kilometers lower than the station. After that, we executed the close co-elliptic burn at 12:51 a.m. Central Time. The close burn puts Dragon on an orbit roughly co-elliptic with the space station. That means it is roughly 10 kilometers lower than the station the entire way around the Earth, instead of just being 10 kilometers below the station at apogee, or its highest point. We also saw the transfer burn at about 2:47 a.m. Central Time this morning. That's the fourth major maneuver where we raised Dragon's apogee again, or the highest point of its orbit, to just 2.5 kilometers lower than the space station.
Dragon,
We rounded everything
SpaceX
out
on
with
the big loop, mid-course burn complete and nominal. Trajectory has converged on waypoint 0.
Dragon copies.
And we just heard confirmation of a good mid-course maneuver. That's about halfway through the journey to waypoint 0 to make sure Dragon is positioned right under the station, again about 400 meters below. So confirmation that they did indeed conduct a mid-course maneuver this morning, and everything continues to look good for Dragon. We are in integrated operations. This happens when Dragon gets closer to the space station, specifically when they enter the approach ellipsoid, that 4 by 2 by 2 kilometer invisible boundary around the International Space Station. This helps us govern all arriving and departing visiting vehicles, whether they carry cargo or crew. We're also hearing good words about teams being go to move inside the keep-out sphere. That's another checkpoint that consists of an imaginary sphere around the station with a radius of 200 meters. The keep-out sphere carries a similar requirement on the orbital trajectory that if Dragon were to somehow lose control of its thrusters, the space station would be safe for 4 orbits, or about 6 hours. However, everything looking good on Dragon this morning. Again, we're in an orbital nighttime. This view coming from the International Space Station as we are tracking Dragon and its approach to the orbiting laboratory. Once Dragon arrives at the space station today, they will be greeted by 7 crew members currently living on orbit. That includes NASA's Frank Rubio, Steve Bowen, and Woody Hoberg, Sultan Al-Nayati of the United Arab Emirates, and Roscosmos cosmonauts Sergei Prokopyev, Dmitry Petelin, and Andrei Fedyaev. That'll bring our crew up to 11 for the next several days. We are looking at about an 8-day docked mission for the AX-2 crew, about 10 days in orbit in total. The crew on the International Space Station will be monitoring arrival this morning, specifically Woody Hoberg of NASA and Sultan Al-Nayati of the United Arab Emirates will be in the station's cupola using special software to track Dragon's approach and make sure it stays in the expected zones. Once Dragon is docked, Hoberg will be our prime to start those hatch opening operations. He will start by opening the large hatch on the Node 2 forward, or Node 2 Zenith that is, giving him access into the pressurized mating adapter. They'll then pressurize the vestibule, and that's the small space between the hatches on the Dragon and space station. Of course, the vestibule is exposed to vacuum prior to docking,
Houston,
so the crew...
on the big loop, Dragon range is approximately 1,000 meters. Monitor long-range approach per steps 1 to 4 in 1.102, Dragon approach and retreat monitoring. ISS crew is now primed for vehicle approach monitoring.
That call up to the International Space Station, just as we were explaining. They are primed to monitor the arrival of the AX-2 crew today. Again, we're heading toward waypoint 0. That's the 400 meters below station mark. We are now 950 meters from station, closing in at about 2.9 miles per hour.
Hello, Zen Station copies.
So once we dock at approximately 8:10 a.m. Central Time, it takes about 2 hours to pressurize the vestibule, the space between the hatches. Flight controllers here in Houston will monitor and verify the pressure readings to make sure that everything is leak-free before we get ready.
On the big loop for approach setup.
Go ahead on the big loop for approach setup.
Ground has pulled go for approach 0 and will be enabling the maneuver shortly. Expected maneuver start time is per your forward displays. Reminder that Dragon will continue through waypoint 1 to waypoint 2 without stopping at waypoint 1.
We copy. Go expected shortly, passing through 0 to 1.
Good to be back.
Good news from the ground to the crew, that coming from the core, the crew operations responsible engineer in Hawthorne, California at SpaceX headquarters, to Commander Peggy Whitson aboard Dragon. The team will not have to pause at waypoint 1. Sometimes there's a pause associated there so they can check out all systems, but things are looking good this morning to continue through. Dragon now 800 meters away from the space station. The International Space Station crew members have been preparing for arrival of Dragon by moving and setting up some laptops as well as crew alternate sleep accommodations. Again, we will have 11 crew members. Feels like a full house aboard the station once the AX2 crew arrives today. Teams also will do things like feather the solar arrays or maneuver them so that they avoid any plumes from Dragon once it gets closer to the station. It's also been a busy time on the space station with another variety of activities, including a port relocation. Just a couple of weeks ago, the Crew 6 crew boarded their Dragon spacecraft and moved it from Zenith, the space-facing port on Node 2, to the forward-facing port. So that is where the AX2 crew will dock today, to that Zenith port. However, the maneuver was to prepare for the arrival of CRS-28, the 28th commercial resupply mission from SpaceX to the International Space Station. That will bring with it some new solar arrays. Those are called International Space Station rollout solar arrays, and those are stored in the trunk of Dragon. That Zenith port, it makes it much easier for the Canadarm2 to help retrieve those IROSAs for eventual installation on some spacewalks later this year. We've had a handful of spacewalks happen over just the last few weeks at the space station, including 3 Roscosmos spacewalks to move and connect and deploy a radiator, as well as 1 NASA spacewalk to...
Just reporting per block 1, vehicle in sight. Houston copies.
We have recently had a spacewalk to prepare for those upcoming solar array installations. And hearing confirmation from the crew aboard the International Space Station that they themselves also have their sights set on the approaching Dragon. Ahead of arrival of the crew today, the space station crew are moving through their morning, including preparing the Node 2 area for docking and hatch opening, as well as getting the required exercise for the day. And here we have a new view of Dragon approaching the space station from the International Space Station itself. Again, we are looking at docking exactly an hour from now at 8:10 a.m. Central Time. This view from the International Space Station while Dragon is still 630 meters away. Again, this is an entirely autonomous flight for Dragon. The crew aboard has been trained that they can take over if needed. However, things continue to move smoothly this morning. The crew off-duty time ended at 5:30 a.m. Central Time. The crew got suited up shortly after, and the big loop was configured, meaning that team members here in Houston can speak with teams in Hawthorne as well as on the space station and on Dragon on one big communication loop rather than on various different loops. Being that it is an autonomous flight, NASA astronaut Woody Hoberg and Sultan Al Nayati of the United Arab Emirates will be in the cupola just to monitor the arrival of Dragon. They can also send commands to the capsule if needed, but that's not anticipated. Hoberg will then be primed for assisting in pressurization of the vestibule and the hatch opening operations. After docking and the welcome ceremony, all crew members will then move into an ISS safety briefing, making sure that they are briefed on everything they need to know while living aboard the International Space Station for safety purposes. Of course, they go through a lot of that training here on the ground, but it's a great refresher once they arrive on board in the microgravity environment. You might have seen a little bit of lighting change. We are now entering into an orbital daytime. Again, we see 16 sunrises and sunsets a day aboard the International Space Station, moving at 17,500 miles per hour, giving us an even better view of Dragon as it gets closer, now about 500 meters from the orbiting lab. The space station and Dragon are now flying about 270 statute miles just west of Chile. Again, we're heading toward waypoint 0. That'll be at 400 meters below the space station. We are now at 480 meters below the space station. The crew will not stop at waypoint 0. They will continue to move through. Once they make their way to waypoint 1, there will be a continued go, no go to allow Dragon to begin its approach to waypoint 2. That's located inside the keep out sphere about 20 meters away from the space station. We do not have to hold at waypoint 1. All of the systems have checked out, and so we have that opportunity to continue moving toward waypoint 2. However, we do conduct a hold at waypoint 2 just to make sure Dragon is completely aligned with the international docking adapter on the Node 2 Zenith or space-facing port. So at that 20-meter distance, Dragon will slow itself down even further, bringing its approach in and eventually make initial soft contact with the adapter soft capture ring. That'll retract and bring Dragon in for the hard capture sequence. Now less than 450 meters away from the International Space Station. Again, we are in integrated operations with teams here in Mission Control Houston monitoring Dragon's approach to the International Space Station, along with teams in Hawthorne, California. The crew are in their suits. They had good suit leak checks earlier today. They also are seated. We have them get in their suits and their seats during dynamic phases of flight. Even though it looks like Crew Dragon is moving slowly, we want to make sure that they are in their suits as a precautionary measure during the docking process. They had an opportunity to get out of those suits, have some free time. As Kate and Duke mentioned earlier, they were able to call down to the ground last night and discuss what it was like to be in microgravity. They also had a chance to get some rest, maybe eat some meals, and then eventually their crew rest time ended at 5:30 a.m. Central this morning. Again, you're watching live coverage of the AX-2 mission, Axiom's second private astronaut mission to the International Space Station. These are not NASA astronauts arriving aboard Dragon today. One of them, however, is a former NASA astronaut, Peggy Whitson. This is her third spacecraft to fly on. She joins a small elite group of astronauts who have flown on 3 separate spacecraft. She has flown on the space shuttle, on the Roscosmos Soyuz, and now on Dragon. Since NASA opened up the space station for commercial activity in 2019, we've continued to work with private industry to prepare for the future of low Earth orbit. And our long-term goal is to be not just the provider of a low Earth orbit destination, but to be a customer. We want to be one of many customers purchasing commercially owned and operated services. So we need to work together today to ensure this path of tomorrow. Enabling these private astronaut missions helps us to refine and mature any of the processes we need for that future. So our NASA astronauts are working side by side with private and national astronauts.
Approach 0 has started and trajectory has converged on waypoint 1. Expected arrival at waypoint 1 is per your 4 displays.
Dragon copies.
Again, we have reached waypoint 0, that 400 meters directly below the International Space Station. Coming up, we are going to move from waypoint 0 to waypoint 1, pausing at that distance of approximately 220 meters, putting Dragon on the docking axis, meaning it's directly in front of the docking port. As mentioned previously, all of the visiting spacecraft take the phased approach to the International Space Station. They stop at predetermined gates for the teams to run quick checks on the vehicle performance before approaching the orbiting lab. When it comes to bringing two spacecraft together, slow and steady wins the race, as docking operations require a great deal of precision to make sure we're keeping the spacecraft and the crew safe. So when we say slow and steady wins the race, we're now traveling at less than half a mile per hour. Again, we are in integrated operations during this time, meaning teams from both Hawthorne on the left of your screen and Mission Control Houston on the right are monitoring Dragon and the International Space Station. Additionally, the Axiom Mission Control here in Houston, Texas as well is continuing to monitor the flight. They'll remain on console this week.
With you on the big loop.
Prior range is 400 and stable attitude as expected.
Houston copies.
The Axiom team will work with the AX-2 crew aboard the space station this week to ensure all of the payload operations that they'll be conducting, as well as any of their downlinks with team members on the ground, as well as media and potentially some STEM outlets will be executed smoothly. Again, we are in a satellite handover of the tracking data and relay satellite system. These are tracked throughout the flight. We see this with the International Space Station as well as on Dragon. Multiple different customers around the world use these satellite systems. All 7 crew members currently aboard the International Space Station, currently moving about their day, some of them exercising, some enjoying their midday meal. Others are working on various payloads and scientific research aboard the International Space Station. There are some constraints as we move into integrated operations, specifically during docking, and once the spacecraft is soft docked, there will be an exercise constraint. We don't want any additional loads imparted on Dragon, so any vibrations that can be caused from using, say, the treadmill or the stationary bicycle, we want to keep that from, again, imparting those additional loads to ensure a safe and smooth docking for Dragon. So the crew will be asked and are not timelined to perform any workout activities during that time. This view from the International Space Station, currently flying 266 statute miles above the South Atlantic Ocean. Dragon is about 400 meters away from the space station. Again, we reached waypoint 0 and have the go to move to waypoint 1, which will put us 220 meters from the space station above the docking on the docking axis above the Node 2 Zenith port. After we reach waypoint 1, we'll move into the keep out sphere. That's the 200-meter sphere with a radius of 200 meters around the International Space Station. Again, this is an invisible boundary, but helps us monitor all vehicles that arrive and depart the orbiting laboratory. For any maneuvers at this point, we are seeing Dragon use its service section Draco thrusters. These each provide 90 pounds of force. There are 12 of those Dracos. Those are only used in the vacuum of space. It's good for these attitude control maneuvers, and those are grouped into 4 clusters of 3 thrusters each. On board, Dragon also has Super Dracos. These are only used for pad or ascent abort scenarios, so these are currently disabled. They are disabled after the ascent portion of the mission. There are also 4 forward bulkhead Draco thrusters. These are located underneath the nose cone. They're used for larger burns like the deorbit burn. However, we're not looking ahead at that currently. We expect that to come about 8 days from now. We are planning for this crew to spend 8 days aboard the International Space Station. Also located underneath the nose cone is the docking hatch. This is the portion that will dock to the International Space Station and the hatch that crew members will use to float in and out of Dragon. This is in contrast to the side hatch that the crew used to board the spacecraft yesterday, that they will also use to depart the spacecraft after splashdown and being pulled aboard the SpaceX recovery ship. Pretty quiet here in Mission Control Houston, as well as obviously aboard Dragon and the International Space Station, as this is a fully autonomous flight, and everything continues to go well for Dragon and its arrival this morning. Again, Dragon has reached waypoint 0 and is making its way to waypoint 1, 220 meters above the International Space Station and its intended destination this morning, which is the space-facing hatch on Node 2. So with that, I'm going to send it back over to Hawthorne for a status update. Kate and Duke?
Thanks, Leah. Continuing to follow Dragon's progress as it gets closer and closer to the International Space Station. We're now just 0.45 kilometers away from the ISS. And as Leah mentioned, slow and steady wins the race. Now, there are teams supporting this mission from multiple locations. This is Johnson Space Center, located in Houston, Texas. This mission control room is staffed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Team members are trained in a variety of disciplines and monitor all station systems. In addition to this control room, we have the mission control room here at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. That's the view there on the left-hand side of your screen. That is where our teams are monitoring Dragon and checking in on all of its systems. And then, of course, the Axiom control room on the right-hand side.
Yeah, right there for Axiom Space. Our team is there in Mission Control in Houston as well. It's pretty fantastic. From this secure facility, we have live access to all the voice, video, and data from the ISS and can work alongside their NASA counterparts to run on-orbit operations and monitor every aspect of the mission in real time. It's led by what we call our AXL, or our Axiom Operations Lead. And there are various positions around the room for research, communications, medical, integration, stowage, timeline operations, etc. It's a pretty significant step in our journey as a company to expand access to low Earth orbit, as it's only the 12th ground segment partner for the ISS program. So through this facility, we are enabling our customers in the global community a front row seat to the work being done on station.
So as you can see, lots of people supporting this mission from all different locations. It really is a team effort to execute these integrated operations successfully. And part of the reason is, as you can see, it's not just the 4 crew members that are inside Dragon Freedom right now approaching the space station. It's the whole integrated International Space Station team as a whole. Once the AX2 crew arrives on station, there will actually be 11 crew members total. And it's going to be pretty exciting. Like Leah said, a full house. But the AX2 crew is going to be super busy. They have a lot of science and research planned, and they will also be contributing to the station as well as the other crewmates that are up there with them.
Absolutely. This crew has a very full schedule well on station, and actually a lot of that time will be focused on some pretty fascinating efforts. For the sake of this conversation that we'll have right now, the science that they're doing is organized into a few categories like life sciences, physical sciences, tech demonstrations, etc. So with physical science, this includes some radiation protection research as well as some storm-related research, helping to create rain, cloud seeding, really fascinating stuff like that, and as well as enhance our understanding of dangerous thunderstorms. There's actually a phenomenon called transient luminous effects, which are upper atmospheric lightning or ionospheric lightning.
And it's awesome that research could potentially help operations at Kennedy Space Center. As we saw yesterday, there was an anvil cloud rolling in, and it's really interesting how this research that the AX2 crew will do could potentially feed back into space operations on the ground.
Absolutely. A very full circle moment right there. So by the time we're launching AX3, we will have those data back and we'll be ahead of the game. So on the tech side of research being conducted, this crew will also demonstrate ways to automate some of the tasks that take up precious crew time, things like transferring data or tracking where supplies and materials are on board the space station. There's also an effort to make communicating with Earth easier. So at the heart of Axiom Space is the mantra to build history, to expand access to low Earth orbit for all. And so we're dedicated to creating partnerships with companies that you wouldn't typically expect to hear about going to space, to grow the volume of those who can conduct meaningful research and research on board and outreach as well about science and everything else included in that. So a lot going on up there, and they're certainly going to have their hands full once they dock, which we should be seeing shortly here.
Yeah, we're very much looking forward to it. Look at this. This is our first view inside the Dragon capsule. I love this view. So on the left-hand side would be our commander, Peggy Whitson, and on the right-hand side of that view was pilot John Schaffner. Now, this view is also very cool because this is looking at the International Space Station from the Dragon.
What a great shot.
Yeah, it's just incredible that we can get these live views and see what Dragon is seeing as it is approaching the ISS.
I love living in the future.
Like we've mentioned before, we are heading to the Node 2 Zenith port this morning. We have passed through waypoint 0, which is the 400-meter mark, which is 400 meters away from station. We're heading up and around over the station to waypoint 1, which is about...
Dragon station on the big loop. Expect reconfiguration of the C2V2 return link shortly.
Dragon copies.
Station copies.
So that was SpaceX core David Huang just letting the crew know of this upcoming event, referring to C2V2, which is the common communication for visiting vehicle. And that's basically just the link for the visiting vehicle, in this case, Dragon Freedom. But yeah, this view is over the shoulders of our commander and pilot, and I love that you can see what they're seeing. In the center, we can see that they are following along with the upcoming events. The views on the far left and far right panel will illustrate which thrusters are firing when. So I don't really see any. We can see a little bit of light flashing. So if you look at the far left panel and the upper right-hand corner, we saw some illumination there indicating that the Draco thrusters were firing. And one thing that I love about our views as we get closer to the International Space Station, the views that we will get from the ISS looking at Dragon, we should actually be able to see those Draco thrusters firing as Dragon is autonomously steering itself toward that Zenith port. Now, when we say autonomous, it's truly what that means. Dragon is doing all the calculations and steering and flying automatically. It is flying itself. That being said, our pilot, John Schaffner, has the capability to take over manual control at any time if necessary. But it is incredible to be able to see what they're seeing. Oh, and that view on the left-hand side there, we can actually see those thrusters, as I mentioned. It almost looks as if Dragon is like spitting out a little bit, and it's just really cool to be able to see that propulsion system in action as Dragon is flying itself to that Zenith port. And I love it with those two views that we just had because it's Dragon looking at Station as well as Station looking at Dragon, which always kind of reminds me of the Spider-Man meme them pointing at each other.
It's a very meta moment.
Mm-hmm.
In that image on the right, you see our Commander Peggy Whitson on the left, pilot John Schaffner on the right, and out of frame our mission specialists Rihanna Barnawi and Ali Al-Karni. Likely also monitoring all these events. Everyone on board this Dragon is probably very, very anxiously awaiting this moment of docking. Ending nearly a 16-hour transit to get to the ISS after launching.
Now we are roughly 20 minutes away from hitting that approach 1, that waypoint 1, which, like I mentioned before, is 220 meters away from the International Space Station. And we can see that the crew has their visors up. We don't require them to put their visors down until they're closer to the space station for that docking procedure. So they're still hanging out, continuing to monitor Dragon's progress. As we said before, once the 4 Axiom 2 crew members get on station, they're going to be there for 8 days, and they're going to be very busy. When you're on station, your schedule is packed with science and research, sleeping. Your sleep periods are scheduled to ensure that everybody's getting appropriate rest, your meal times, and then, of course, you have to build in some exercise time as well. But yeah, the crew will be very busy once they get on station. So these final moments before they actually arrive might actually be very calm and restful because, like we said before, the crew right now, they are monitoring, they are keeping an eye on Dragon systems, and of course keeping in contact with the integrated operations teams from all 3 mission control centers that we mentioned before. Once again, this is a live view of the International Space Station from Dragon. It almost looks fake. It's so clear and beautiful. As we get closer, you should be able to make out more clearly the various vehicles that are docked with the International Space Station. Once we get closer, I definitely want to keep an eye on to those various ports. As we mentioned, we did a port relocation maneuver for the Crew 6 capsule.
Dragon Station on the Big Loop. C2V2 link reconfiguration complete.
Dragon copy. C2V2 config complete.
As I mentioned, we did a port relocation maneuver for the Crew 6 capsule, which is Dragon in Denver. It was relocated to the Node 2 forward port, and we should be able to see that as we get closer. And I just love it when there is a Dragon capsule getting a view of another Dragon capsule that is on station. We had that view during the Crew 6 docking, if I remember correctly. So this is a live view coming to us from the International Space Station of Dragon Freedom as it approaches. All right, so as we are continuing to get closer to the International Space Station, we are heading towards that waypoint 1. Let's check back in with Leah over at Johnson Space Center to hear how things are continuing to progress with the International Space Station's preparation for Dragon Freedom.
Hi, Kate. Hi, Duke. Thanks for carrying us through a little bit of that. And yes, that's no moon. That is Dragon approaching the International Space Station. As you heard, we've reached waypoint 0, that 400 meters away from the space station. We're just a little bit below that now. But as you can see, we've made quite a bit of movement. Our previous view of Dragon had the Earth in the background. Now we have space in the background. The spacecraft has moved out in front of the International Space Station, still less than 400 meters away, about 380 meters right now, but we're moving up to waypoint 1. And again, waypoint 1 is about 220 meters away from the space station. It'll be directly above that Node 2 zenith or space-facing port. We have the opportunity to pause here, check out any systems if needed, and we expect arrival at waypoint 1 in about 10 minutes. Once Dragon reaches waypoint 1, the next stop is waypoint 2. That is only 20 meters away from the International Space Station, so that's when we hope to get that crystal clear view of Dragon Freedom and its 4 crew members inside. We do conduct a hold at waypoint 2. This is to make sure that we are properly aligned with the docking target on Node 2, also known as Harmony. After reaching waypoint 2, Dragon will slowly but surely move in and dock with that port, conducting a soft capture first before the hooks begin to drive and complete a hard capture. Then it takes about 2 hours until Dragon hatches are ready to be opened and the 4 new crew members make their way aboard the space station. Now 350 meters away from the station. Again, this is Dragon Freedom. It was named that by the Crew 4 crew that visited the International Space Station. Spacecraft keep their names after being named by the crew, so this one will always carry the name Freedom regardless of who's flying on board. On the International Space Station side, things continue to move smoothly. Again, we have NASA astronaut Woody Hoberg in the cupola along with UAE astronaut Sultan Al-Nayati. They're monitoring Dragon's approach. It is a fully autonomous flight for the visiting spacecraft, meaning there is no action required on part of the crew. However, they do have the ability to take control if needed, as well as the crew aboard the space station can send commands to Dragon to retreat if necessary. But we're not expecting any of that this morning as things continue to move smoothly, now 330 meters away from the orbiting laboratory. On the space station side, the solar arrays have been configured. Again, teams here in Mission Control Houston will command the solar arrays into a position, we call it being feathered. This keeps any loads from being imparted on the solar arrays themselves from any plumes that come from Dragon as it makes those fine-tuned maneuvers. We are in a satellite handover again with the tracking data and relay satellite systems, but a great shot here of mission control at SpaceX in Hawthorne, California. Again, we are in integrated operations now that we are inside the approach ellipsoid, that 4 kilometer by 2 by 2 kilometer invisible oval that helps us monitor all of the arriving and departing spacecraft at the International Space Station. And on the right-hand side of your screen, you've got Mission Control Houston. These teams work around the clock, 24/7, to monitor all of the station's systems. Leading the teams this morning is Flight Director Marcos Flores. And communicating with the astronauts aboard the International Space Station is Capcom, or Capsule Communicator, Justin Cartledge. On the left now, you can see the Axiom Space Flight Control Room. They are monitoring the flight as well. They'll remain on console this week to help the crew members execute all of the research and the payload work that they have planned. Additionally, they'll be conducting several downlink events with various media and other STEM organizations here on Earth. Now just 290 meters away from the space station and closing in. Again, slow and steady. We are less than 1 mile per hour as we see Crew Dragon move toward the International Space Station Zenith port. Once we reach that, it'll be waypoint 1. We hope to see that in about 5 minutes, and we're tracking docking again this morning at 8:10 a.m. Central Time, so just about 20 minutes from now. So look back at what has brought Dragon to this point. Less than an hour after liftoff last night at about 5:23 p.m. Central Time, Dragon executed the phase burn. This was the first of those 5 major burns. This raised Dragon's orbit using the Draco thrusters, and about 7 hours later we had the boost burn. This put our crew in an orbit where Dragon's apogee, or the highest point of its orbit around the Earth, is 10 kilometers lower than the space station. After that, we execute the close co-elliptic burn, and this puts Dragon on an orbit roughly co-elliptic with the station. So it means it maintains that orbit about 10 kilometers lower than the station all the way around instead of just at apogee. The transfer burn occurred at about 2:47 a.m. this morning, Central Time. This is where we raised Dragon's apogee. Again, that's the highest point of its orbit to just 2.5 kilometers lower than the station. We want to make that co-elliptic one more time, so we round that out with the final co-elliptic burn. That was at 3:34 a.m. Central this morning, maintaining the constant orbit about 2.5 kilometers below the station. We also saw the approach initiation burn just at the start of today's broadcast. This really begins the final stages of Dragon's rendezvous with the station, and we started integrated operations between the Dragon control team in Hawthorne and the space station flight controllers here in Mission Control Houston. This approach initiation brought us up to waypoint 0. Waypoint 0 is 400 meters below the station. This is the first checkpoint during the approach. We have now entered the approach ellipsoid, that first boundary of monitoring the arrival and departure of visiting vehicles. Of course, we didn't even have to hold at that 400 meters. All of the systems checked out, and Dragon has continued its approach to waypoint 1. This happens when we are about 220 meters away from the space station. We're currently 240 meters away, so we're getting very close, and that 220 meters at waypoint 1 puts us on the docking axis, meaning it's directly above the docking port. So we're heading toward the zenith port of the International Space Station's Node 2 module, also known as Harmony. Currently docked to the forward port, we have Dragon Endeavor, which brought the Crew 6 crew. So once Dragon is only 20 meters away,
on the Big Loop, approach 1 and soft capture ring extension will begin shortly. Dragon will continue approach to waypoint 2. Reminder that manual impulsive retreat recovery is not permitted.
Dragon copy.
Station copies.
and confirmation that the spacecraft has arrived at waypoint 1. Again, we have the opportunity to hold here. It's 220 meters away from the International Space Station, specifically in line with the docking axis on the zenith port of Node 2. And you can see some of those thruster plumes coming from Dragon as it fine-tunes its approach using those service section Draco thrusters. A great view of those thrusters firing on Dragon as we are at waypoint 1, 220 meters away from the International Space Station, specifically directly above the space station. And inside Dragon right now, we have our 4 private astronauts, Peggy Whitson, the commander, pilot John Schaffner, Rana Barnawi, and Ali Arkhani.
Block Bravo.
With you on the big loop.
Pry range 208 meters and decreasing attitude as expected.
We copy and concur from the ground.
Beautiful view for a moment there. We have of Dragon, this courtesy of Cronus. Cronus flight controller here this morning is Brian Crisp in Mission Control Houston. Dragon's thrusters continue to fire. We are now less than 200 meters away from the space station. We have passed through waypoint 1 as well as the keep out sphere. And the keep out sphere is that 200 meter radius around the International Space Station, another invisible boundary that helps us monitor our arriving and departing vehicles. The next pause for Dragon will be at waypoint 2. This is a hold point. That's 20 meters away from the International Space Station when we move in toward final docking. In this view of Dragon Freedom, you can see the hatch or the nose cone is opened and a good view of those 4 forward bulkhead thrusters. Those are used for the larger burns. We are now using the 12 service section Draco thrusters. These are for more fine-tuned attitude maneuvers, especially as we get closer to the International Space Station. The nose cone protects those thrusters as well as the docking mechanisms aboard Dragon. We're expecting arrival at waypoint 2 in about 8 minutes. And again, looking for docking this morning at approximately 8:10 a.m. Central Time. Dragon Freedom is now 164 meters away from the International Space Station. So while we are moving less than 1 mile per hour, we are continuing to close in on the destination for the AX-2 crew.
Dragon on the big blue. Visors are closed for all 4 crew.
Copy, Dragon. Visors are closed.
As we've mentioned earlier, the AX-2 crew are in their suits and in their seats. We got that view over their shoulders this morning. They do not have to wear their suits for the entirety of the flight. When they are not in these dynamic operations periods, they are welcome to take those off and get into some more comfortable attire specifically for their sleep portion of their flight. However, now they are in their suits. They've conducted suit leak checks through the umbilicals that connect to the spacecraft itself. These also provide communications and cooling for the astronauts. And as you heard Commander Peggy Whitson just report down to the ground, the visors have been closed on the suits, so they are preparing for docking. And again, we're looking for that about 10 minutes from now. We do have some time and some hold time that we can conduct at waypoint 2 if needed. We can wait until lighting conditions are preferred for Dragon to move in for its final docking. Once Dragon flies in and makes contact with the international docking adapter, we will have soft capture. This is when the soft capture ring retracts, and sensors will indicate it's time for 12 hooks to drive in place. Once those hooks have fully driven, we'll have hard capture, and that firmly secures Dragon to its new home on the space station. Now just 130 meters from the International Space Station, everything continuing to move smoothly for Dragon.
Station on the Big Loop, our review of steps 5 and 6 is complete and ISS is ready for docking.
Houston copies.